He said to me, "John, never again will Labour go into an election not trusted on national security." And ours is a party with deep pride and deep roots in defending this country. Throughout most of the last century, it was working men and women who served and sometimes died on the front line. It was a Labour government after the Second World War that established NATO and our independent UK nuclear deterrent. And when Keir became the first Labour leader for over 30 years to visit the Barrow shipyards a couple of months ago to see the nuclear submarines being built, he said this is the bedrock of the UK's national security and the UK's defence. It is the bedrock for the contribution we also make to defending our NATO allies. This is a changed party. The Labour Party is now the party of defence. And if you want proof of this, then it's the record number of new ex-forces parliamentary candidates standing for election on July the 4th. A total of 14 great ex-forces candidates wearing red rosettes, standing for Parliament to represent their constituencies. And I have to say, I'm honoured to be speaking here alongside 10 of those 14. They chose to serve the country in the Army, the Navy, the RAF. They choose now to serve the country in Labour, in Parliament. And what you did, most of you can't speak about. What you sacrificed, most of us cannot know, just as it is with our currently serving men and women in the forces, their families, and the veterans. And our armed forces are among the best in the world, respected throughout the world for their total professionalism. We're proud. We thank you. But this election is about change. And it is time for change. It's time for change for our armed forces. And for 14 years, the Conservatives have failed our forces. What does it say to our adversaries, when the ex-Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, admits to me in the House of Commons that over 14 years the Conservatives have hollowed out and underfunded our forces? What does it say when they've cut the size of the British Army to the smallest since Napoleon, when they've wasted at least £15 billion on bad defence procurement, when they've missed recruitment targets every year, when morale has fallen to record lows, and when service families have to live, as Louise said, in damp, mouldy housing, and increasingly draw on universal credit and food banks to get by? This is the shameful record of the Conservatives on defence for the last 14 years. They're failing British taxpayers. They're failing British forces. And it's time for change. Britain will be better defended with Labour. We will spend 2.5% of GDP on defence to deal with the increasing threats. We will introduce a triple lock guarantee on our deterrent, so it's there for future generations. We'll fulfil our NATO obligations in full and ensure Britain is the leading European nation in NATO. We'll make our allies our strategic strength. We'll conduct a defence review to reinforce homeland protections and deter growing Russian aggression. And importantly, the men and women in our armed forces and their families will be at the heart of Labour's plans for defence. And so I now want to hand over to Keir Starmer, the leader that has changed the Labour Party, the leader that has put Labour back in the service of working people and the country, the leader with a mission to change Britain and a plan to make Britain secure at home and strong abroad. I give you Keir Starmer.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me start by thanking you, Louise, for your service. What a fantastic contribution you will make to Parliament as the Labour MP for North East Derbyshire. And thank you, John, for all your support and your leadership on this vital issue. Now, this week is the 80th anniversary of D-Day. So I want to start by remembering the bravery of those soldiers who sailed from the south of England to the beaches of France. Their individual courage and collective strength of our troops, whose sacrifice that day turned the tide of the Second World War, brought liberation to Europe, secured our freedom. This week and every week, we will remember them and we will honour them. Some gave their lives so we could live freely. Others returned home to build a new Britain. We salute those who remain with us today and keep the memory of their fallen comrades alive. And we recognise with one voice, as a nation, that our debt could never be paid in full. But of course, we can honour their sacrifice with our decisions today. And we must, because sadly the world we live in today is perhaps more dangerous and volatile than at any time since then. And frankly, for my generation, that's a shock. I remember vividly the day the Berlin Wall came down in 1989. I remember how I felt, a sense of freedom, of possibility, of peace. European countries once again free to choose their own futures, new allegiances being made, friendships forged out of the scars of war. And above all, a sense, as the wall came down, that nothing like that could happen again, an end of an era. I didn't think that in my lifetime I would see Russian tanks entering a European country again, the rumble of war rolling across our continent, soldiers kissing their children goodbye, desperate families fleeing across European borders in search of safety. But in that moment, as we saw those pictures from Kyiv, I understood the post-war era is over and a new age of insecurity has begun, an era where the burden of history for people and nations will once again be heavier on our backs. National security is the most important issue of our times, something which, of course, is always true, and which for us, if we're privileged to serve our country, will become our solemn responsibility. That's not something I say lightly. The security and defence of our nation is personal to my family. Like so many families, I have relatives who served in the Second World War. My mum's brother, my Uncle Roger, served in the Falklands on HMS Antelope. And I remember the terrible wait when his ship was bombed. My mum's fear as she sat by the radio every day listening for news. And then the relief, a long week later, when we found out that he'd survived. So I know the courage, the service, the sacrifice that allows us to sleep soundly at night from our forces and their families. I know it, I respect it, and I will serve it with every decision. It is part of my story, and the reason why I said from day one of my leadership that the Labour Party had to change for a purpose, to respect your service, face the future in this dangerous world, and above all, to keep Britain safe. That is why, with my changed Labour Party, national security will always come first. That's a message I took to Kyiv last year when I visited President Zelensky, a pledge of unwavering British support in the face of Russian tyranny. But we have to be resolute, not just in our support for Ukraine, but also, in this era, at home. We must face down malign actors who try to attack and weaken our nation, and not just through traditional warfare over air, land and sea, but with hybrid threats to our energy supply, cyber security, information warfare. Now, I would prefer if politics were kept out of this issue, even at this election. Throughout the whole of this Parliament, I have deliberately not been partisan over issues of national security. Yet just before this election, the Tories questioned this Labour Party's commitment to national security. And I will not let that stand. The people of Britain need to know that their leaders will keep them safe, and we will. Furthermore, the truth is that after 14 years of the Tories, we are less safe and less secure. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. The Tories' own former Defence Secretary says the government has failed to take defence seriously. We have the smallest army since the time of Napoleon, at a time when other countries are firmly on a war footing. And so, even as we work tirelessly for peace, we have to be fit to fight. So let me be unequivocal. This Labour Party is totally committed to the security of our nation, to our armed forces, and, importantly, to our nuclear deterrent. Just a few weeks ago, I visited BAE Systems in Barrow-in-Furness. I was the first Labour leader to visit in 30 years. I saw the nuclear submarines being made. I saw an industry that supports the local community. And I met workers who are proud to be doing their bit for our national security. They deserve our full support, and they will get it. The nuclear deterrent is the foundation of any plan to keep Britain safe. It is essential. That is why Labour has announced a new triple-lock commitment to our nuclear deterrent. We'll maintain Britain's continuous at-sea deterrent 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, deliver all the needed upgrades, and we will build 4 new nuclear submarines, like the ones I saw in Barrow, that won't just keep us safe, but will also support good jobs and growth across the UK. One of my first visits after I became leader of the Labour Party was to Plymouth, the front line of defence in this country. Devonport alone employs 2,500 service people and civilians. It supports 400 local businesses and generates about 10% of Plymouth's income. And when I was there, I met the shipbuilding apprentices, talented, ambitious young people. And I looked them in the eye, and I promised that I would fight for the future of Plymouth's defence industry. And I will. Because it's only by harnessing and supporting the strength of proud communities like Plymouth, Barrow, Aldershot, and so many more that means we can safeguard our security and our growth for decades to come. I mean, look at Ukraine now. Industrial capacity is an absolutely critical part of security. So with Labour, Britain will be fit to fight. Within the first year of a Labour government, we will carry out a new strategic defence review. We are absolutely committed to spending 2.5% of GDP on defence as soon as possible, because we know our security isn't just vital for our safety today, it's absolutely central to our success for the future. National security and economic security must go hand in hand. And we also know that playing our part on the world stage makes us stronger and better off at home. So make no mistake, I am absolutely committed to rebuilding relationships with our allies. I went to the Munich Security Conference back in February. I met world leaders from the US, Europe, and the Middle East. I met the Secretary General of NATO. And I pledged to each of them that with a Labour government, the UK would be a point of stability in a chaotic world, that we would always meet our international obligations, take our responsibilities seriously, be a leader on the world stage once more. Because when I spoke about D-Day at the beginning, I wasn't just talking about respect for our past. I was thinking about our future as well. Because that is the best example of what cooperation can achieve in the face of fascism and aggression. Our joint endeavour, our shared values, our common respect for freedom, democracy, liberty. That's what we're fighting for, and that fight never stops. There's a narrative you sometimes see that our values are a point of weakness. That's what Putin thinks. But he's wrong. Ukraine has shown that. And we must be prepared to stand up as well. Those values are our cause and our strength. Let me be clear. This is not a party political issue. This is a national issue. It affects every single individual, every community. And Labour will always put our country first. We will serve working people across our nation, respect our armed forces as they continue to protect our country. But on July the 4th, there is a choice. And you can choose to rebuild our country that is proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with European allies, that leads the way in standing up for our values and our freedom all around the world, and that will never shy away from doing our duty at home and abroad. A stronger, safer, more secure Britain with Labour. That is the choice. It's time to stop the chaos, to turn the page and rebuild our country together. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to take some questions from the media now, starting, Chris, with you. Chris Mason from the BBC.
Thank you. Chris Mason, BBC News. Keir Starmer, you could be Prime Minister next month. If circumstances necessitated it, would you authorise the firing of nuclear weapons, yes or no? And Has the Labour leopard really changed its spots on defence? The man who could be your Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, in a matter of weeks, the woman who could be Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, in a matter of weeks, both voted against the UK's nuclear weapons just 8 years ago, as did plenty of other current Labour frontbenchers. How unshakable are their views?
Well, Chris, firstly, on the nuclear deterrence, it's fundamental. It's a vital part of our defence. And of course that means we have to be prepared to use it. Now, nobody who aspires to be Prime Minister would set out the circumstances in which it would be used. That would be irresponsible. But it is there as a vital part of our defence. So, of course, we would have to be prepared to use it. On the other point you put to me, look, this is a changed Labour Party. And the most important thing is that I voted in favour of the nuclear deterrent. And if we are privileged to come in to serve, I will serve as the Prime Minister of this country. And my commitment to the nuclear deterrent is absolute. Absolute. That is why I voted for it. That is why I've changed this party. And that's why it will be the #1 issue for an incoming Labour government. Thank you, Chris. Carl from ITV.
Thank you, Sir Keir. I just want to press you on that point. Angela Rayner and David Lammy both voted against renewing the nuclear deterrent. David Lammy said he was doing so on the basis of his Christian faith. Have you spoken to them about this? Have their views changed? Do they now support the nuclear deterrent?
I lead this party. I've changed this party. If we're privileged to come in to serve, I will be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And I've made my commitment to this absolutely clear. And I've got my whole cabinet, shadow cabinet, behind me on this. We have changed the Labour Party. And I know full well that national security, defence of our country is the #1 issue. That is why I voted to renew the deterrent, and that's why I've been absolutely clear on this. I lead from the front. I've always led from the front, and this is an issue I feel very, very strongly about. Thank you very much, Carl. Serena from Sky.
You just said in your speech that you think playing a part on the global stage is important. You want to be a leader on the world stage. So on that issue, today 100 creatives have signed a letter urging you that if you get into government, they would like to see you halt UK arms sales to Israel. And they say this would end UK's complicity in war crimes in Gaza. Now, they said it would be a symbolic a symbolic move in line with your vision on change. Now, you said you want to see a summary of the UK's legal position around this. So my question is, do you believe in a moral case for stopping arms sales, given your concerns that you've said around the horrifying scenes in Gaza?
Well, the scenes in Gaza are horrifying, particularly in relation to Rafah. And that's why the #1 priority is to ensure we get a ceasefire. We've been saying that for months now. And that means a ceasefire straight away, a cessation of the hostilities. Far too many people have lost their lives. Aid is desperately needed in the region. And, of course, there are still hostages who are held and have been held for a very, very long time. So humanitarian aid needs to get in. There needs to be that ceasefire. And there needs to be the beginning of a political process that leads to a two-stage solution. With Palestinian recognition as a state as part of that process, alongside a safe and secure Israel. So that's what needs to happen. That's where we want to work with allies. And that is important to me. But throughout this conflict, I've been in contact with our allies to make sure that if we are privileged to come in to serve our country, we're in a position to pick those discussions up and work with our allies towards that ceasefire. On the question of the arms sales, it is for the government, obviously, to review the licences. They do it one by one. They have got legal advice. We've been pressing them to disclose that legal advice. And I still press them to disclose that legal advice. Obviously, if we're privileged to come into power, we'll be able to see that advice or commission our own. But look, I will just add this, that the Rafah offensive should not go ahead. And that I think our government should follow the US lead on this in relation to arms sales and review the licences to see whether any of them would be or are being used in Rafah offensive. Thank you. James from Forces News. James.
Hi. Given that Labour is committing to the future of the nuclear deterrent today, Sir Keir, have you given any thought personally as to what you might write in your letter of last resort to the commander of the Royal Navy submarine who might have to fire those weapons should you be unable to communicate that order in person?
Well, James, my commitment to the deterrent is absolute, as I've made clear in my votes in Parliament, as I've made clear on a number of occasions in speeches and other interventions, and as I made clear when I went to Barrow to see for myself the submarines being built. As to the circumstances in which the deterrent would be used, obviously that is a matter of high confidentiality, and as I say earlier, you wouldn't and nobody would expect someone who is serious about being Prime Minister to disclose the circumstances in which he or she might take action. Thank you so much, James. Amelia from Channel 4.
You've mentioned your changed Labour Party there several times. Events around candidate selections over the past week have drawn a lot of heat. Is enraging the Labour left actually part of your campaign strategy? And specifically, how comfortable are you with the way Faisal Shaheen's case has been handled? Well,
This is a changed Labour Party. And part of that change is being absolutely clear about country first, being absolutely clear about the importance of defence and security, which is what we are doing this morning. And part of it is about making sure I've got the best possible candidates to put before the country. I am delighted that what you're seeing behind me is some of our brilliant candidates who've served their country, distinguished individuals who, as Louise said, have served their country and are now not standing by but want to come and join the Labour team. We've got 14. That's a record. That is evidence of a changed Labour Party. 14. That's the highest number in recent times that we've ever had as a Labour Party. So I make no apologies for the fact that I wanted the highest possible candidates to go into this election. This is a changed Labour Party. It is a Labour Party back in the service of working people, a Labour Party that puts defence of the realm and national security as our number one issue. Thank you so much. Elaine from ITV Granada.
Yes, Elaine Wilcox, ITV Granada. Conflict is going on right now in Gaza, but you didn't mention it in your speech just now. Voters here in the northwest have been abandoning you in droves over your leadership or lack of leadership on Gaza. As a former human rights lawyer, do human rights matter in Gaza?
Yes, of course. And international law matters in Gaza, and accountability matters in Gaza. And you wouldn't be human if you weren't affected by the images that we've seen, the reports coming out of Gaza, the sheer number of people who've been killed, many of them women and children, and also the knowledge that the hostages are still being held. And I've met some of the families of Palestinians in Gaza who've lost family members. That's extremely moving, very powerful. I've met the families of those who've got hostages who are still being held in this conflict. And again, nobody can be but moved by their powerful testimonies. The best thing we can do for both sides, for everybody concerned, is to press for that ceasefire immediately, straight away. That has been our position for weeks and weeks and weeks and months. We will join with other countries to that end if we get the opportunity to do so. And I think there's a lot of common ground here with other people who I know are deeply concerned about the issue in Gaza, and I'm not surprised. But the first and most fundamental thing is getting that ceasefire, ensuring we can get hostages out. I shudder to think what state they will be in. To make sure we can get humanitarian aid in, desperately needed, and has been for a long time, absolute catastrophe. And then, you know, that duty that we will have if we come into power to play our full part in resolving the conflict in the Middle East for the long term. And that can only happen if we work with our allies, if we play our part on the world stage, and clear the path for a two-state solution. I'm not going to pretend that's going to be easy. I'm not going to pretend this isn't a very difficult starting point. But that has to be, will be, the only way forward. Thank you so much. Aletha from The Guardian. Aletha.
Hi, Keir. You've been on quite the political journey. To summarise, at university you set up a Marxist journal, you ran for leadership on a left-wing campaign and have since dropped most of those pledges, and last week you described yourself as a socialist. At what point in your life did you come to support the use of nuclear weapons, and why? And one more, if I may. Rishi Sunak earned a fortune working at the Children's Investment Hedge Fund, which engineered a deal at the heart of the financial crisis. The Guardian understands Labour is about to launch a number of major attacks on this. Why have you waited more than 18 months to scrutinise this?
Firstly, on the question of national security, Aletha, as you know, before I came into politics in 2015, I was the Director of Public Prosecutions. So I had to work with our security and intelligence services on national security issues. I had to deal with operations where we were taking down terrorist gangs that wanted to destroy the very fabric of our society. One of our operations involved a plot to blow up 7 aeroplanes in the middle of the Atlantic at the same time. Can you imagine the devastation that would have been caused, not just to this country, but across the world? We had to take real-time decisions in those cases that I was part of trying to do my part in relation to defence of this country and everybody that lived here. So I don't need lectures from anyone on national security or the importance of protecting lives in this country. And since I've been in Parliament, I've been absolutely resolute on this issue. On the question of the hedge funds, we have raised this before. I think it is relevant in this election for the electorate, for the voters to know what did the 2 candidates for Prime Minister do before they came into politics. I was working for the Crown Prosecution Service in the way I've just described, trying to protect those who live in the United Kingdom from crime. Rishi Sunak was making money, betting against the country in the financial crisis. I think that's for him to answer as to what he was doing before he came into politics. Thank you so much. Chloe from the Eye.
Thank you. Can you confirm that the percentage of defence spending will begin to increase in the first year of a Labour government, even if you can't specify exactly when you will hit the target? And just quickly, what's your message to would-be Labour voters who want to see more of an emphasis on peace?
Just on the 2.5, we want to do that as soon as possible. The first thing we need to do, and we're committed to it, I was the first to say it, and the last time, of course, we were on 2.5% of GDP on defence was under the last Labour government back in 2010. In the intervening 14 years, this government has never hit the target of 2.5%. So that was the last time. We want to hit that target as soon as possible within our fiscal rules. But the first thing we need to do is the strategic review of defence to assess the threats that we face, to deal with the capabilities and to ensure that we have the resource that we need. Now, that will take place straight away. It's important because although John and I have had a number of briefings from the government on Privy Council terms, for which I'm grateful, in relation to the intelligence that they hold, we don't know the full picture. So we want to carry out that review straight away and assess exactly what resource is needed. But the 2.5 commitment is absolute as soon as possible. On the question of peace, look, I'm absolutely committed to peace. I don't think there'll be anybody in any political party, actually, Labour or the Tories, who wouldn't be committed to peace, or anybody who serves their country that isn't committed to peace. But for peace, you have to be prepared to fight. And that is why I've said what I've said this morning. Thank you so much, Chloe. Ashley from the Mirror.
Hi, Keir. In 2020, you vowed to introduce a new law to giving MPs a vote before any military action. Do you still stand by that pledge? I think you called it the Prevention of Military Intervention Act.
Yes, I think it's very important that if there's to be military action, that there is the support of Parliament for it. Now, it has to be sustained military action, of course. We've had the Houthi attacks and the response to that as a one-off response where we haven't had votes. But where it's sustained, I do think, and this is actually something David Cameron effectively introduced, its practice and convention, if you like, because he could see, and I can see, the importance of ensuring that the whole House is behind any action that is deployed. And I think for our armed forces, it is important as well, if it's sustained action, for them to know that Parliament is fully behind the action that they are being asked to take when they put their lives on the line. Thank you very much, Ashley. Max from The Times.
Max Kennett from The Times. Last year, you said you would repeal the Northern Ireland Legacy Bill, which gives an amnesty for crimes committed during the Troubles. That bill was supported by many of the veterans groups you stand alongside. Are you still committed to repealing it? And if so, are you worried about dragging elderly veterans into the courtrooms again?
Well, I am committed to repealing it, and I'll tell you for why. I worked in Northern Ireland for 5 years, working as part of the Good Friday Agreement to establish the police service of Northern Ireland and to ensure that that police service had the confidence of all communities. And that was a very successful piece of work, never complete in Northern Ireland, but a hugely important part of our history, which is very important to me in terms of my journey. In relation to that legislation, for a government in Westminster to pass legislation which has the support of no political party in Northern Ireland and no community in Northern Ireland is, in my view, a mistake, particularly based on my experience in Northern Ireland. And I would actually dispute that across the armed services that they're all against they're all against repealing or the legislation, because it provides an amnesty for all sides, including the terrorists. And I know that many people feel extremely uncomfortable about that. I don't doubt the issue has to be resolved, but resolving it without the consent and the support of the communities and political parties in Northern Ireland, in my experience, having worked in Northern Ireland for 5 years, is not the right way to resolve this admittedly difficult issue. Thank you so much, Max. Jim from the FT.
Jim Pickard, Financial Times. Having a thriving domestic steel industry is a very important part of Britain's national security. The Labour Party has criticised the £500 million deal that the government has done with Tata Steel to keep Port Talbot going, because it will involve the loss of thousands of jobs in turning that site green. But you are potentially about to enter government as Prime Minister. Would you continue that deal that hasn't quite been completed, or would you rip it up and start again with the potential risk of Tata Steel walking away completely from the UK?
I'm very concerned about the situation in Port Talbot. I'm very concerned about the situation in Scunthorpe, because it is very important for us that we have the capability in the United Kingdom to produce our own steel. And that is on the line in relation to what's going on in Port Talbot and in Scunthorpe. So I went to Port Talbot myself, as you would expect, to talk to the workforce there, to talk to the trade unions, to talk to the management, and to talk to the ownership, to have confidential discussions with them, because my number one issue has been to save those jobs that are there, that are at risk, and I've looked in the eyes of those that are vulnerable to losing their jobs, but also the importance of the steel industry. What I wouldn't do is what Rishi Sunak did, which is when Mark Drakeford, as First Minister of Wales, asked Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister for a phone call to discuss jointly how they could save those jobs. Rishi Sunak said, "I'm too busy." That's shocking. I went to Scunthorpe. I've spoken to the management of Scunthorpe and to the workforce at Scunthorpe. Their issue is whether they can get an electric arc furnace in quickly. I've understood the issues and the problems. I'm absolutely committed that we can overcome those hurdles with them. So in relation to Port Talbot and to Scunthorpe, I'm absolutely vested in not just saving those jobs, important though that is, but also to the future of steel making in this country. Because my fear is if we lose it, we'll never get it back, and that will be a backward step. Thank you, Jim. Amy from The Telegraph.
Thank you. Amy Gibbons from The Telegraph. Firstly, can I ask, what do you think is the number one threat to Britain's national security? And secondly, on a different issue, do you regret that another private school is closing as a result of your plans to add VAT to fees? Will you take responsibility for that?
Well, the number one threat to national security is not taking it seriously enough. It's not appreciating that it has to be the number one priority. The threats are obviously threats, in relation to Russia, China, the Middle East, etc., etc. The conflict, I do think most people feel we're in a more volatile world now than we've been for some time. The nature of the threats has changed. As I say, it's not just the traditional way in which threats are carried out. It's cyber, it's information, a part of the attack on us. But understanding national security is the number one issue. In relation to, sorry, the second part of your question, on private schools. Look, I've seen a number of reports of private schools closing, and you look at the details, it's got nothing to do with Labour Party policy at all. In fact, I think hundreds of private schools have closed over the last 14 years. And it's about time that that was put into the mix when these stories are reported. Thank you very much. And I'll go to Noah from The Sun.
Thank you, Keir. John said earlier that men and women in the armed forces will be at the heart of Labour's plans for defence. So could you please clarify today whether you will keep a veterans minister in your cabinet?
Yes, we will. I think it's very important. And so, yes, we've been committed to veterans for a long time. John and I have spent a lot of time with veterans. We're very pleased to have some with us here today. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you for being here. I know it's a bit hot in this room, but we can now all go outside and enjoy a little bit of the fresh air. Thank you very much indeed.